Good afternoon. We are Group 3. We are the Flowtographers, and our task was to expand automation and improve processes to meet the needs of DAR. I'm Wendy. I am the very newest member of this group. I didn't do all the hard work, so let me introduce the people that did. We have Caitlin, we have Andrew, Usman, Samvertika, Caitlin, Doug, Bobby, and Chris.
All right, so those of you who have joined the IMB since our last all-hands meeting are probably... Yes. This is my slide. So those of you who have joined us since our last meeting are probably wondering what a flowtographer is. I don't think any of us knows what a flowtographer is. It was really just the product of a bunch of brilliant minds coming together at the beginning of the year and trying to make up a catchy name that would represent really what our purpose is. And as Wendy explained, we really set out to map core processes within our branch and try to improve them. And so as daunting of a task as that may seem, we noticed at the very beginning that we had pretty equal representation from at least 4 of the 5 sections within IAMB. For some reason, the Office of the Branch Chief decided they were too good for our group. But at least we had the other 4 sections. And so that gave us an opportunity to have good representation from each section and really leverage expertise across all the different sections. And so what we decided to do to focus on exactly which processes we would decide to map and then try to improve, we divided into subgroups according to our specific sections that we represent. And so, and then with that, we met within our subgroups, and then we came up with a few different processes that we wanted to improve. And so, but at the end of the day, we just decided to do one. But the subgroups were divided as follows. For acquisitions, it was me and Caitlin, and we ended up deciding to focus on vendor invoicing. And Caitlin will talk about that later. The FDS had representation from Usman and Samvertika, and they decided to create a new process for submitting requests to their group. All of you know that we send them lots of requests, and so this will be very helpful. From Gen Admin, we had Melissa, who's no longer with us, and then Doug, focusing on improving the budget reporting process, which can be very time-consuming. And then last but not least, we had 3 representatives from Space and Facilities. We had Bobby, Chris, and Ashley, and they were all focusing on improving the major renovation activation process. And so Ashley will go into a little more detail about our method.
So the goal that we worked on was divided into 3 objectives. The first 2 objectives were largely completed in the first half of the year, and we reported out on those at our summer retreat. To recap, Objective 3.1 was to map the core processes, so each team within our group developed an as-is map of the existing condition of their selected process, and then presented that to stakeholders affected by that process to validate that it had been captured correctly and also to obtain feedback on the efficacy of that existing process. Objective 3.2 was then to analyze those maps for problems and inefficiencies. And since the summer retreat, we've largely focused on the third objective, which was to develop solutions for each of those problems that were identified. And so each team will present the developed solution.
All right. As Andrew mentioned, that one of the tasks that finance data system, part of the data system was tasked to do was request for a new project. So what we did is we standardized, we were tasked to standardize our current ad hoc process to a structured process using the guidelines of system development lifecycle. I'll explain, those of you know system development lifecycle, but don't in the to-be process what those phases are. What we have identified based on our current project that we work with acquisition and in the past year or year and a half, that we have identified some of the issues that with our current ad hoc processes. It was an unstructured system. The priority wasn't captured properly. The time frame, the delivery of the project, there was inconsistency and transparency wasn't there. These are some of the issues that we were capturing with our current ad hoc process. With doing this to-be process, what we gain is it will resolve all the current issues that we have. It'll streamline the process. It'll save a lot of time between stakeholder from the data system team and person requesting the system or process to develop and accountability for our metrics as well. So this is how our to-be process look like. I'll just go into a little bit detail. So to-be process is divided into six phases and 2 roles. As you can see on the left-hand side, these are roles: requester and stakeholder, requesters, and data systems. And on the top, you'll see the phases. They are divided into sections. The first one is a requester. So in this phase, the requester will request the inquiry or the system what they are looking for. They will propose an idea, and then we'll auto-acknowledge it. The second phase is planning phase. In this phase, the stakeholder, which is the requester, and data system team will collaborate and decide the priority and a time frame delivery of the overall project. And requirement gathering will happen in this phase also. The third phase is design phase. In this design phase, it's more heavily towards data systems. So they will create the interface, look and feel, provide the proof of concept, and keep validating with the user end and getting their feedback if any changes are needed. The fourth phase is development and implementation. This is the most important phase of all the phases that we'll go through. In this phase, the back-end coding, the validation, and bi-weekly meetings will happen with our stakeholder and keep validating with this process, because this is the phase where majority of our time takes based on our recent projects that we have done. The fifth phase is test and maintenance. In this, majority of we'll do the testing based on our work done and based on the user feedback that we have with all of our implementation done so far. And we'll have the user acceptance test also in this phase, so if the user is satisfied with our product. The last phase is feedback. So in this phase, after we deliver the product, we would like to go back to the requester and see after they are using it in like a month or a couple of weeks, give a survey out and see if they are satisfied with our product or if we need to keep improving on the product. And Samvartika will go into a detail of our current and a future plan for how people can submit this request and what our plans
are. So to have our ideal stage of 2B, we would like to develop an online request system to create greater efficiency, which will have e-forms as initially, and then it will have an online system. So we aim that by January 2015, we will have a PDF form that will be available to all NHLBI staff. And by August 2015, we will have an automated online request system for new project that should be available to all NHLBI staff. This automated online request system is basically a central system which will allow all these users to have a central database where they can request any new project to data system team, which will have e-forms and a SharePoint-based whole online system. To accomplish this online system, we have 3 major phases, which are planning and design, implementation code, test and proposal. The first phase is planning and design, which will have a whole plan and a blueprint of the plan, which we want to have. From this phase, we will have a PDF version very soon by January, which will be available to everyone for requesting a new project. Then we will have implementation and code. There we will be creating new forms and we will be implementing everything in SharePoint, which will be done in from March 2015 to May 2015. And then in the last, we have test and proposal, where the data system team will be testing the whole new system, and it will be given to review to the management team, and they can tell us if we can go live or not. And then in the end, we have created a mock-up form. So this is a mock-up. This is just a proof of concept how it will really look as a PDF version. And by August 2015, we'll have an online system. So I'll give to Kate for that.
So as Andrew already kind of went over, we discussed invoicing. And I know you guys aren't purchasing, a lot of you. Just to describe the difference between invoicing for a purchase card and a purchase order. We're talking about a purchase order here. So the credit card, it's pretty easy. You give the vendor your credit card, they charge it. End user is going to verify they received the items, and then PA is going to reconcile it, match it up with a requisition, and you're done. Easy, right? So when it comes to purchase orders, purchase order contracts, that's a direct deposit into the vendor's bank account. So with that, you have more players coming into the picture. I'm just going to flip this so you can see. You have the Office of Financial Management, you have COAC, people who were not playing in the game when we were talking about purchase card. So there's a lot more room for difficulties, a lot more complexities, and you have a lot more back and forth. So there's issues naturally with this process. So that was where me and Andrew kind of got to take a look. And so starting from when our strategic working group began up until July, we were really looking at the ins and outs of this process. We found there was a lot going on. And we found it's not that the core process is terrible or broken, but it's being carried out inconsistently. There's lapses of communications at times. There's a lack of accountability at times. So that's kind of what we started to really look into July going onward. And that led us to really make our goal to be standardization, education of stakeholders, and improvement in accountability. And so to get the most bang for our buck, because we do have a lot of external stakeholders, we decided the best thing we could do, in addition to documenting all the issues we're seeing, was really focusing on our in-house stakeholders, which are the purchasing agents and requesters, our scientists, the people who are putting in these orders. And the role where they really work the most together is going to be once vendor bills and the invoice is processed by the Office of Financial Management, there needs to be a verification that the goods and services have in fact been received. And it's a little different than P-card in that the purchasing agent is responsible for verifying that receiving, but ultimately it's the end user, the requester, who really knows when something's been received or not. So that's what we decided to look at. And so in our implementation, we realized that all the purchasing agents kind of do it differently. Some notify the end user, some don't. And then you get this invoice on hold notification. Xena has to run reports. Sometimes receiving is not entered in on time. So we thought in our implementation, the first thing we would deal with was standardization. Let's have everyone do it the same way, same level of accountability, same expectation. And so the way we really thought was best to do this, looking at the purchasing agent standpoint, is just to make sure that every purchasing agent is somehow notifying the requester or end user that the invoice is on hold. And it could be through email or through POTS, but there's just evidence that the purchasing agent has reached out in some form to the requester and asked them to verify receiving for the invoice that's come in. And whether the requester answers or not, there's documentation generated as a result to show that, yes, we're making that effort. And if they do reply, we have that full chain of accountability. The requesters are verifying that they've received the items. So all around, it's better than just putting in receiving, which is what sometimes happens now. Just having that full circle of accountability. As you can see here, this is just a sample screenshot, how we already notify people in POTS, say, hey, enter receiving, a little more elaborate since there's an invoice, even attaching the invoice copy so they can view it themselves, be like, yep, I got line items 1 and 3. Other parts that would fall into this first phase, these are things, mind you, that we can do really in the here and now and have the most impact, would be really educating our requesters in our PA workshops to understand the difference between a purchase order and a credit card order, because receiving is just a different story for these two. And I've been able to kind of iterate that in some of my purchasing workshops, and it seems to go through, but that is something we can really work on. They don't make any distinction in their orders what the mechanism is at all. Other things include just really highlighting the notifications for invoices on hold. I think sometimes they get buried in the inbox. There's ways to work on that using Outlook. And we'll work on that throughout implementation. The second part is, this is the hard part, it's automation, right? So we want fewer human touch points. We want fewer times that a purchasing agent is having to go and manually enter something, communicate something. That just doesn't make sense when we have great systems like POTS that can work with us. So I kind of did a kind of a mock-up of how it is kind of now. You have something from OFAM that goes to MBS. PA gets notified about it through email. So obviously we're getting tons of emails a day. It's getting buried in that inbox. And it's up to them to take from there to the requester. So you can imagine how that breaks down at times. It's not happening in a timely fashion. What if we have bots communicating with NVS and having that communicated both to the PA and the requester? You're cutting out middleman. We're using bots in the best way possible. We're having the accountability we desire. And so there's several changes like that we want to see. We really have to talk with NVS people to see how feasible they are, what we can do, what's within our range. So that's something looking toward the future. Andrew, this is kind of his baby. He works with invoicing all the time. He's going to be really the one to take this on forward, set up those meetings, see what we can do, and kind of create mock-ups of how we can move forward with this. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff.
So Melissa and I worked on downloading data from the data warehouse to automatically update our budget reports for the FTE. What we used to do is have to run off, well, we still run these reports, but we would have to run these off for each FTE. There's about 460 in the division to get the year-to-date totals, the most recent biweekly cost, which is used to project the rest of the fiscal year, and any one-time payments for things like cash awards. So we would then go and have to manually put all of those numbers into the report each month. So this is very time-consuming, and there's a lot of room to make an error with entering all those numbers. So we worked with CIT to automate this. We now have a master spreadsheet that sends a query to the data warehouse and automatically pulls all this information in. And you'll see over to the left, it's got net ID and CAN combination. So that's how we identify people, because sometimes people have been paid on more than one CAN. If they transferred in the division or there's been an organizational change, and the budget reports are organized by CANs, we have to separate that information. So back on the budget report, in all of those fields where we used to manually type numbers, there's now a formula which looks at the net ID CAN combination in that row, then goes back to the master spreadsheet and searches for a match. And if it finds a match, it pulls in the information for the appropriate cell. So everything we used to do manually is now automated. The last change we had to make was closing out a budget report once it's finished, because at that point, you don't want the formulas. The formulas will always pull in the most recent information, and we want to lock in the information for that month. So there's a button there which prompts people to do a save as to create next month's report, which has the formulas, and then goes back to the old report and strips them out and just leaves the data, so the data is preserved. So we implemented this at the beginning. This is the, I guess, overall flow for how it works. But we implemented this at the beginning of this fiscal year, so we've done it for 2 months. And so I guess we just asked the AOs and ATs, how is it working? Like it? Is it an improvement?
So I'm going to talk about the major renovation activation process that Chris and Ashley and I worked on. And so when we refer to the activation process, this is usually, historically, we referred to this as the events that take place when the major renovation is complete. So construction's done and we're moving people in, and what are all the things that are associated with that, like buying furniture, organizing a move vendor, things like getting keys, phones, all that stuff ordered and in place. And so a lot of times what we would do is wait until the very end, like towards when construction was wrapping up, and start on some of those tasks. And we get into situations like, hey, furniture is going to not be here for another 2 months. So, that's going to drive our end date out a ways. So Chris and Ashley and I looked at, well, what are all the things that go into this, and how do we create a better way of tracking that? So some of you may have seen all the Post-its up on my wall. So this is our initial brainstorming that Chris and Ashley and I had to kind of just get all the information out there and sort it out. And then we went to an even more complicated kind of bubble map of how all those steps fit in and are related to each other. And we've kind of ended on this more streamlined version of all the tasks that are associated and where they fall within the major renovation process. And so some of the things that some of the benefits that have come out of this process is that, so we have a standardized activation schedule that we can use for all of our major renovations going forward. So we just put this in Microsoft Project, and it's a tool that the assistant project architect can use in conjunction with the project architect as they start off on getting involved with the activation in these jobs. We've aligned all of those individual steps that are associated with activation with each of the phases that are in the major renovation process. So if you're going to be buying furniture for a given project, you're going to start thinking about what that furniture should look like and how it fits into the space up at the planning phase of the major renovation, not when construction's wrapping up. And so all along the way of the major renovation, you'll be taking action on each one of those steps associated with buying furniture. So planning, designing it, procuring it, kind of in parallel with the steps in the major renovation. And then lastly, it takes milestones for each of those things that are in the activation process, and it assigns those time frames so that it can link with the major renovation project schedule, and then it will then automatically calculate how much time is needed and when the critical dates that you have to start acting on some of those things are. And so what this will be able to do for us as we start to implement it is as we communicate with the end users, when you're actually going to get to start using the space, we can give them a more realistic time frame. So let's say we know that construction is going to complete at the end of December. We could say the third week of January is when we plan to move you in, and you'll be actually fully operational. And so using that tool, I hope that we can set better and more clear expectations going forward. And so this is going to be maintained within the space and facilities management section clearly. And we're going to start off, there's a project here in Building 50 on the 4th floor that Chris and Amy are working on, and we're going to use that as our test to see how this tool works out, get some feedback, and if we need to make any iterations and adjustments going forward, we'll do that.
So at the end of any major effort, lessons learned are extremely important. So I can tell you that, after this year-long effort, this has really given everyone a glimpse at what each section may face, and, everyone's processes and all the challenges. Subgroups, section-specific subgroups were really key to making this group successful because everyone could act as a subject matter expert. They could break away. They could really explore, the difficulties they have with certain tasks and maybe external bodies or individual systems. So biweekly working groups, or meetings, we always have to meet. But what was really important since we had the subgroups was to get back together, have rigid meetings, make sure we always keep them, but really to sit back and report out on what every group is doing. Process selection, that's just as important as the meetings and as the subgroups, but really looking at where can you make an effective change? What can you do to that process to make it better? A lot of the stuff that we interface with right now, we can't really change. So do we focus inward? Can we focus on a certain step within that process? So that's really important. Documentation. One thing that we really did up front in the mindset of streamlining is we set up templates for absolutely everything. So we had template meeting minutes, we had presentation outlines, we had documented every single milestone submission because we wanted to create legacy documents so that we can go back and sift through all the information that we have created in the beginning of the year. And that helped us at the very end when we were looking at our final report. So we don't have to dig back through emails or through handwritten notes. Everything's documented on the network and it's filed. And so for the next person that decides to take on this strategic working group, we have some of those legacy documents that we can certainly pass on. A lot of the work is already done. And then group leadership. I know for me, and especially for the next person, I'd say section, sitting down with each section chief and really talking with them about the processes that are selected so that you fully understand them. I know for me, I work in space facilities. Most of you guys know that. Maybe some of the new folks don't. But I don't necessarily know at the granular level everything that everyone else has to do in their section. So that would have benefited me. I'd just like to pass that on to the next person that might want to write a proposal for this working group. So in the end, anyone have any questions? Gary.